Hey everyone, this is Collin Moshman, and we're going to be looking at a Star's $100 buy-in Sngman101. And today, we're going to be playing another game. Last time we played the Styles game, where we decided how we might play the hand in a tighter than normal style, and also playing loose aggressively. Well, today, our game is going to be called How Can We Play This Hand? And it's sort of an improv variety show type thing. Now, basically what I'm going to be doing here is looking at the hand and the ones where I fold, give some way that we can modify the hand where I would find it playable. So that might be the stack sizes, it might be the player category I'm up against, a lot of times it'll be the hand strength, and essentially, besides just showing you guys what I do, which hopefully is kind of useful as well, I also want you and myself to have to kind of think beyond and think, what would I do? So if the situation were a little different, if the situation were a little different, what would it require for us to have a good opportunity to enter the pot? And we'll go ahead and do that, again, as well as talking about the normal analysis. Okay. So in this hand, even without the raise, of course, I fold the 10-5. I would also have folded it if it had been folded around to me. I wouldn't even bother to complete with that hand. But if I had had 10-Jack, I would go ahead and throw in a complete there. 10-Jack offsuit, though, I wouldn't raise early in an SNG from the small blind. Okay, the ace-5 I'm certainly going to fold. And if it had been folded to me and I had ace-7 against two very tight blinds, I'd go ahead and raise to 50. And speaking of tight blinds, loose blinds, whatever, Boku and the tight, I believe, are going to be winning regulars, and I think Dan and Dan is as well. So we'll also look at the statistics we gather at the same time. And I want to take a look actually at that last hand as well, because I think something kind of subtle but interesting happened in this one, unless I'm totally wrong here. Okay, so notice here that Boku has an automatic check, and he folds. So maybe he's sitting out, but it could also be that he's multi-tabling and not really paying attention to what's going on. So I'm not trying to criticize him. I'm sure he's a very good player, but it's very important when you multi-table to really have your eye on the ball and make sure that you can handle the number of tables you have up. So in this hand, I'm going to fold the Queen-Jack, despite there being three limpers. But if it were suited, I would call. And the reason for that kind of subtle difference is simply that with the offsuit, I've got some minimal straight possibility, but it's largely a top pair hand. Whereas when you throw in a kind of high flush draw as well, that makes it a lot more playable against three limpers. I would probably also go ahead and limp with the offsuit if I had the button in that hand. And those would be two ways that I'd probably play it. So we'll move on. Okay, the 7-Jack. Let's see here. If it had been Ace-Jack, I would go ahead and play that. And against a guy who I don't know and maybe appears to be a little loose, I think I would go ahead and make a raise to 100 or so. You can also just call behind. Folding wouldn't be a big mistake with the Ace-Jack either during a low blind Sngman101 play. But King-Jack, for instance, there would have been a definite fold, whereas Ace-Jack would be about the minimum you would consider playing there. Okay, already forgotten what I had that hand. Let's just move on a little. And 9-3 of diamonds. If I had suited 9-10 from the button, I'd go ahead and make a raise. Maybe that one's a bit of a reach. But pretty much from early position, there's very little leeway during low blind Sngman101 play. You really need a very strong hand to go ahead. and open these pots. Like I've said before, I'm generally folding a hand as strong as ace-queen under the gun early in the sit and go, and the hands I'll come in and raise with are ace-king and pocket tens or above. Pocket nines or eights you can certainly raise, sevens I'm generally laying down. So basically playing a hyper tight strategy there. Okay, in this hand, if I had queen of spades, four of spades, I would strongly consider throwing out a semi-bluff of around 80 here, because I would have a strong draw and everybody's shown weakness. And as is, what hand is going to take this? Okay, well this guy's showing twos. I'm really guessing the twos will take it. I think, certainly nobody's going to have an ace after everyone having checked, and I think a 7 or a 9 are unlikely as well. So I'm guessing these guys to smuck. Pretty loose call early on with the suited 6-8, and this guy definitely looks to be playing a loose passive style. I've said this a lot quickly. The statistics here are VPIP, PFR, and post-flop aggression factor, and if you guys have any questions, just shoot me something on the forums and I'll answer that. Okay, Jack King offsuit. I don't like to raise a lot from the small blind, but against a player who amusingly calls himself the tight, and I believe actually does play a fairly tight style, I'm definitely going to come in with the Jack King, and 9 King I certainly wouldn't, and 10 King would be pretty debatable, but 10 King suited I'd raise. And when I am raising from the small blind, 4 big blinds is my default raise size. Unlike, for instance, when I'm raising from the button, where I usually come in for around 2.5 blinds. So if it had been folded to me in that hand, I would go ahead and probably make a raise to 125 against these blinds, who I believe aren't going to defend very widely during mid-blind play, which should be correct. Okay, in this hand, if I had had suited ace-10, I'd consider making an isolation raise to 150 against this player who's, after 12 hands, is confirming our initial read of being probably loose passive, having, over a limited sample size, played nearly half his hands without a single raise before the flop. And the deuce 10 is an obvious fold, but here, it's a suited 10 jack. I think I would fold, but if we had suited jack queen, you could, that would be about the minimum you consider. Even that would be stretching it a little. Suited jack queen. So there aren't a lot of hands with a 10 in them that you're going to want to play from here. Suited ace 10. Ace 10 offsuit, I think, would be okay from the hijack, but you really, I think from G33's position, I would fold the offsuit ace 10, and from my position in that hand, I'd probably come in with a 2.5 blind raise. Okay, the queen 9 offsuit, if I had been the button, I would probably come in with the 2.5 raise. Okay, queens, obviously I'm going to play, and normally you're a little concerned about an under-the-gun player limping, not so concerned that you fold, or even just limp behind, but you might consider if you raise and he, say, 3-bets all in, maybe you could get away from that, but certainly against him we're going to go ahead and very confidently assume you're the best hand. So we make a standard 4-blind raise, since there's already a limper and we're content to win immediately. And that's a fine result. We pick up 125 chips without a fight. And the 2 queen, again, it's harder under the gun to play this game because there just aren't a lot of under the gun hands in an 8-handed sit and go that you should be very inclined to play. So One way that I would play that would be ace queen. So during 50, 100, it wouldn't be a mistake to lay down ace queen necessarily, but I could go ahead and bump it up to 240 or so, 240, 270, and even that would be kind of marginal. Again, folding ace queen under the gun is fine during 8-handed play, even with mid blinds. Okay, suited 9-10 instead of suited deuce 9. I call the bet. While this hand goes on, let's take a little bit now that we have like 18 hands to talk about these opponents. So the tight and Boku are kind of going along with what we thought and playing pretty tight games, which is what they should be doing. And I'll come back to this hand in one sec. Note that MDOS and Vioil G33 are playing what appears to be very loose games. So unless they've been having really good runs of cards, these statistics are way too loose. And since we saw that guy limping earlier with the 6-8 of diamonds, and based on some other stuff, I think it's pretty fair to conclude that most likely these are weak players, particularly G33 and MD. So note that, and Dolphin and Dan, it's kind of hard to say after a limited sample, but even at the hundreds and above, you will absolutely find weak players. And in this hand, one thing that's kind of interesting here is looking at it, it's very hard for me to find a good way to modify it, because when the effective stacks are around 11 and 13 blinds, it's kind of awkward here, because even if I had a considerably stronger hand, then I don't want to. So some hands are corrected as shove. Okay, if I had pocket sevens, I could go ahead and seize a plus equity shove. But if I come in with a raise to like 250, sort of my default raise, then this is a really good resale opportunity for a player like the tight, who is going to recognize these, since I believe he's going to be a pretty good player. And if they come over top, you're in one of those tough situations where you're getting good pot odds, but you don't want to be the caller. So there aren't a lot of really good situations here. So again, like pocket sevens I just shove, but pretty much I would need a hand strong enough to shove or strong enough to call an all in if I were to make that raise. Like for instance, ace jack, I can make a raise to like 300. And then I would know that if one of those guys came over top, I would be prepared to call the all-in. But I wouldn't make a conventional steer raise and then just casually lay it down, because I think these guys are good enough they're probably going to re-steal me fairly often. Okay. I don't want to cheat on the game here, so this time we're in the cutoff with 9-7 offsuit. And one time that I would play this would be if this were the bubble. So if all of these guys were eliminated, and it was just us four left with our stacks correspondingly greater to account for the missing chips, then I would play 9-7 from the forced to open position in a four-handed bubble situation. And if the blinds were still 50-100 in this hypothetical, my raise would be to around 225, 250, 275. I would just be avoiding min raises and raises to 300 or over. Okay, here the minimum king I would need to enter would be, I enter with king jack suited and with king queen offsuit. So those would be the weakest kings. King 10 I wouldn't really consider, and even more so because both blinds appear to be kind of loose. So in this particular hand, if I were in the small blind and I could shove on Dolphin with my suited Jack 8 with effective stacks of around 7 blinds, because Dolphin only has about 1,000 chips, then I would go ahead and do that. Dolphin gets eliminated. Okay, let's just take a quick look And so I don't know what this hand is going to be. Let's play a game together, guys. Let's see if Dolphin is doing something dumb here, or if Rostia is, or whoever makes the raise, or if this is kind of inevitable. So we've got a min raise. Now, if I'm Dolphin, Muda appears to be pretty loose, maybe not super aggressive, so I'd probably come over top and shove with like King Queen, Ace 10, Ace 9 maybe, pocket 6s or 7s. So the majority of the time, this guy isn't going to fold for another 800 or so chips, but he's got to make a move sometime, and if he's got some kind of hand, he can do it for value. So let's see. Okay, Ace Queen, very legit, and Ace 4. So the Ace 4 is weak. If you answered weak, you are correct. And the reason it's weak is because he has just about no fold equity, and his hand is likely not to be best there. Okay, he was raising only another 800 chips against a loose opponent. Very unlikely he's going to get a fold there. And Ace 4 is going to be behind some hands that MDOST will do this with, such as like King 10, but it's never going to be very far ahead of these hands, and a lot of times if he's not ahead, he's going to be a big 70-30 underdog against a pocket pair or a better ace. So he's getting short stacked and he makes an aggressive play, and it's hard to really fault that too much. I've certainly, if I've had one leak in the past, maybe it's been over-aggressing with some of my reseals. Because again, the aggressive spirit is really the correct one. However, Ace 4 there is just too weak. Even like Ace 7 or Ace 8, or a low suited ace, like Ace 4 suited. Okay, in this hand, we get a walk, so there's not much to say. If G33A completed, we would shove. Okay, if these guys have both folded, I would shove against the tight. That'd be an unexploitable shove. You can know my exact shoving range. Know that I'd shove with hands as weak as King 5, only call with better hands, and I'd still show a profit. Again, if you guys have any questions about these things that I'm kind of throwing out, like unexploitable or the stats, just hop on by the Sit and Go Stocks Poker Forum, and me or one of the other excellent guys who post there would be more than happy to fill you in. Okay, Ace Jack, I lay this down. This is kind of a slightly borderline laydown, but notice that besides having to worry about the initial limper, G33 hasn't raised a single hand so far, and now he's very happy to get it all in the spot. You could still call. I mean, this is sort of a read-dependent one. I'm going to wait to take the initiative, since it's very hard to put this guy on a range. Him having never raised one, we haven't played with him before, and he could certainly be doing this with something kind of random, like Ace 5 or pocket deuces. He could require a premium hand to be making this play, and there's also a very slight chance MDOST is trapping. But if, for instance, G33 were a winning regular and MDOST had not already limped, then I would go ahead and put in all my chips, since I would know that I would be ahead of his range there. Unfortunately, there's a showdown, so I'll be very interested to see this. The tight is not going to be calling very wide. I think the tight is going to have at least Ace Queen or pocket 8s here. That'd be my best guess. And again, I really don't know about G33, so I'm pretty interested to see what he's playing. Okay, pocket 8s exactly. So good call. I don't think he would have done that with much worse, but with 8s, I think that's pretty reasonable. And the King Queen. Okay, fine. I actually think that's a good play because, MDOST appears to be a high blind limper, or at least he's got the stats to be one. So he could certainly not be trapping there. And so G33's got some fold equity, and at the same time, Well, when he's called, he can be called by a hand that's flipping him, such as pocket fives, or even a hand that's worse, like king 10, that he has dominated. So I'm not going to fault either player. I think they both did good there. With the 9-5, if I were had suited 9-10, even then with suited 9-10, because if I were to raise with under 10 blinds, I'd want to be shoving, so that would be troublesome. I think I would lay that down. But if I had suited 9-10 from the small blind, let's go with that, I would shove that. Now, M-DOS is kind of interesting. He's limping all the time, right? With his 42.9, and yet he folds that one. That's a situation where I'm at least going to complete a pretty high percentage of the time because the table is beginning to get a little short-handed, and Viola has a decent stack, so I like to put pressure on these guys, and my limp steal play that I talk about in Sngman101 strategy, where you limp and then bet any flop, is a pretty low variance yet profitable play as the table gets short and nears the bubble. So with under 10 blinds, I just go ahead and shove the ace queen. You can make a smaller raise with the plan of calling a re-raise, and there's not too big a difference in that. One reason I'm a bit less inclined in this situation is because we have a couple of loose passive guys that could potentially just flat call me, and I'd rather just take it before the flop rather than have to play after the flop against a guy who might be willing to gamble with a lot of hands. And with this 9-5 off, again, make it a bubble situation where there are 4 guys left and I'm forced to act. We've got way more than 10 blinds and chips, and then they might raise just about anything. Other than that, there's not a lot I'll play there. Okay, if he just limped, obviously I'd check. That one might be cheating, whatever. If it's folded to me, I'll shove, which I actually do. This is my non-all-in, all-in, where I'm clearly putting the guy all in and making him look like maybe it could be a value raise. Probably not much difference in general. If I had been the small blind against Boku, I would shove the suited 8-3 because that would be an any 2 profitable shove with effective stacks of 5 blinds. And similarly, if I had been the small blind there, I'd just go ahead and put Viola all in with the weak queen. And with king queen there instead of king 6, I go ahead and just shove. Okay, we didn't see what I folded under the gun, but we'll take a look at this hand instead. And bang, we get a monster. So this is pretty obvious. We have what appears to be a steal raise from the button. And regardless, we're way ahead of his probable range here. So this is a much stronger hand than he'd most likely need to make the play. And I think that's pretty straightforward. The 9-10 I will shove if it's folded to me. Okay, we get called. This is definitely a profitable shove. The run 6 blinds effectively. So not much. It's pretty much preordained. Okay, again, if this were 3-handed play and our stacks were correspondingly greater, so these guys' stacks migrate to us, and we've got like 4,000, 4,000, and 6,000 or whatever, then I would come in with a raise to around 450, 500 with my 7-5 of hearts on the button. As is there, again, this is a situation like earlier where the stacks are kind of awkward, and I'm pretty much looking to shove or fold. Or if I do make a smaller raise, commit to calling a re-steal, because that's going to happen often enough where guys recognize that it's a profitable situation. Okay, the king-queen I raise, because it's a strong hand, and I don't really want to shove it. I don't think it's profitable to just shove. Clearly, I'm calling the re-raise, the min re-raise that puts Fiol all in. And I think 8 King is a little weak even with his short stack. I mean, clearly he's got no fold equity. If either Dan or G33 had shoved, I would call with my Ace-10 offsuit. If Boku had, say, 1800 after posting rather than 2200 after posting, I'd go ahead and shove that low suited jack. I believe as is, though, that would be a minus EV shove, with him having around 11 blinds and chips. We will look at Wizard afterward, and see if I've messed up somewhere. Okay, here if I had suited 10 queen, I'd come in with a small raise, rather than the 6 queen. And King 7, if this were, again, the bubble, I would, as the first one to enter the pot, I'd raise King 7 as about the weakest king I would raise. Dan and Dan makes a pretty good any 2-card shove. Queen 5, if I were in the small blind, I would shove. In fact, if I were in the small blind with most hands, I would just shove, because with the antes, we've got a pot of, starting pot of 425, so it's like their blinds of 100, 200, with some guy just throwing 125 into the pot before the action starts. So Dan and Dan, I like that shove with 6-8 of diamonds. You know, you always look dumb when you make kind of a marginal shoving and call with a better hand, but it's often correct to shove very wide, or even any 2. And Dan was in one of those situations. Okay, if G33 had folded and Boku would have had 10 blinds or fewer, I would have shoved my 4 deuce offsuit. Only because of the antes. And same situation there, with 10 blinds or fewer from the small blind, I'd shove the 6-4. Maybe not against M. Dost, but against any tighter player. That suited 9-10, if Dan and Dan hadn't already been all in by posting his blind, would be good enough for a small raise. Maybe 450 or so. Always takes a little longer for the office replay to load, with the antes too. Let's see what I folded here. Okay, 7 queen offsuit is a definite fold, and if this were, say, queen jack suited, then I could go in for a small raise. One thing is that when it's like 5-handed or something and you raise under the gun, you're going to be getting more credit than you normally would. Like, even if it's a 9-handed game and the first few guys fold and you raise from the hijack, which is equivalent to raising under the gun in a 5-handed game, you tend to get a little more credit in that 5-handed situation a lot of the time, just because it looks like, you know, it's something different. It looks like you're raising under the gun and maybe you need a stronger hand. So, and in this situation here, I'm shoving very wide because the ante as well, and we're dealing with effective stacks of 10 blinds. Okay, this is kind of an overshove. I normally don't like to shove 14 blinds. The problem, though, is my hand is strong enough that if I were to make a smaller raise, I'd have to call a resteal due to my hand strength. So I'm just going to go ahead and shove. And I don't know if that's necessarily... Like, I could raise to, say, 500, call the re-raise from Boku, and fold to M. Dost. Or maybe just raise to 500 and call from either. Those would be 2 alternative approaches. The one approach I think is too weak is laying that down from the button. Okay, 5-10. If I were on the button and I had my stack, I would consider raising a really chunky hand, particularly if the blinds were a little tighter than these guys are. So let's see what these guys show down. Okay, I don't think Boku made too bad a shove. It's not super positive equity, but it does play well when called against a premium hand, and he was getting short stacked, so that's not so bad. Not sure if it's correct, but it's not an egregious blunder. Okay, so now the blinds rise to 200, 400, and we're looking to be really laggy now. So if G33 is completed, we'd shove. We're going to shove very wide if it's folded to us here. 7-9, I believe I'm going to shove this, and this is about the weakest hand I'd shove. I mean, it's not profitable to shove any 2 there, particularly against a pretty loose big blind, but I think 7-9 is going to show a profit. We'll check. Here I fold Jack-9 off, so I would shove this from the small blind, but it's not profitable to shove it with the factor stacks of 10 blinds against 2 opponents. One opponent though, again, so from the small blind it is. Okay, so before you see what I do, what do you guys think is a good play here? We have a limper, a caller, and it's on me with pocket deuces. Well, sometimes you gotta be suspicious of a button limper, but against this pretty loose opponent, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm 99% sure to shove this, and the reason is because the pot is nearly 1300. Okay, we've got 400, 400, 475, so 1275, and our hand plays, if called, a lot of times it's going to be against 2 overcards, so we'll be flipping. If everyone folds, we win 1300 without a fight. So I'm happy to do that with any pocket pair. On the high card end, what would I need to shove there? Well, I would say like Ace 8. I would shove King Jack. I would shove Queen Jack suited. I'd shove. So not premium hands, but not junk either. Need some kind of a hand. This is obvious. You're definitely not gonna lay down jacks 3-handed with short stacks. Okay, with a low king and 10 blinds, that is a shove that is going to win you some chips. Not a ton, but you're going to show low profit there. And this is kind of marginal. I could actually go ahead and shove this. It's going to depend a lot on what he's calling with initially and what percent of those hands he would call all in with. So I think this is actually slightly weak to just check. It's not egregious though. And normally I would bet out this up. I actually don't really like my check call as much. I kind of prefer betting out about half the pot and then evaluating from there. But the worst play there would be to check fold because mid pair is very likely to be best here, as is bottom pair. Okay, any heads up situation, even the 4 here looks very good. So I could also have bet there after my flop line. This is a fine turn line, but I'm not going to be folding to pretty much any bet. And this is also a little weak, but it's not quite as bad because if our opponent had any piece of the flop, he's really he's hidden because any 9 beats our 9 with a weak kicker if it's not split. Any 4 is just made trips, and a very unlikely ace is still ahead. So if he were to have bet there, I would certainly call most bets. And as is, that's kind of a marginal hand, but again, the really big mistake would have been check folding the flop. So here I'm making a non all-in with my 9-5 off, and again, that's probably only slightly plus EV, but it is a lot better to be too aggressive than too passive during high blind play. Our opponent checks, we go ahead and put it all in with mid pair, and this is sort of a weird hand. He folds, so our non all in proved to be a pre-flop and flop value raises. So this guy really isn't thinking very well. It's kind of what this hand shows, and really not much more to say. That's one where I didn't play the hand amazingly or anything. He just made an egregious blunder. Okay, in this hand, what's our calling range? Well, The pot is 1550, and it costs us around 700 to call. Getting 2 to 1, I'm going to call with pretty much any hand. Like with deuce 3 off, I might fold, just because I think, based on the last couple hands, I could really outplay this guy. But from a chip perspective, you're probably going to be making a slight profit with even the weakest of hands, and certainly with any face card, I'm calling without any hesitation. And I believe that ends it. Okay, so now, as promised, let's see what Wizard has to say about this. And I'll pull this up. Let's see. Hope this is visible here. Okay. I've recently switched computers, so as you can see, this is my trial version of Wizard. I've been too lazy to go ahead and get the actual one. Okay, so the green checks indicates that it likes the hand, and let's see if there are any that we noticed that were pretty debatable as played. Um, okay, okay. So here's, for instance, the 9-10 hand that we shoved, and I believe we got called by Boku's aces. So it's showing this as a definite push. Boku, um, he might not be calling quite this narrow. For instance, he knows that I'm going to be shoving kind of wide, and he's very short stacked. So maybe he's going to call with hands like Queen 10. Let's say he's calling like pretty wide. Like, okay, so this is King 6. King 6, Jack 9 suited. This is kind of wide, like 35% of hands, over a third of hands. And, let's see. Okay, so even with 34%, we have, a nice low gain by shoving. So unless he's calling extremely wide, then that's profitable. Okay, so now let's go back and continue on down the list. The Queen 8 hand, I believe, is going to be an error because we're shoving over 10 blinds. Same with the King Queen hand, but let's look at that one anyway. And let's see. So this one turned out not to be okay, pushing or calling. So it is a 10 blind, but it's also saying that I'm losing chips. So it's saying that it's pretty dumb on all fronts, basically. Let's see if we agree with the ranges, and then we'll criticize me. Okay. Ace 9, Ace 7 suited, pocket fours. Yeah, okay. May even be a little wider, actually, so we're certainly not going to be winning much more there. And 18% from this guy. I don't think Ace 5, even from a loose guy. I'm shoving 14 blinds into him and threatening his chip leadership, so he's not going to go super narrow, but I think this might exaggerate a little. So let's say Ace 8 is about the cutoff here, and he might be calling with King Queen, but folding with Ace 5 suited and pocket fours, so maybe this is about right. And it's still saying it's a fold, so it's not an enormous mistake, but it's saying it is a mistake, and I actually believe that now, looking back. I think a better play would be to raise to maybe 450, 500, call an all-in resteal from Boku, and fold to one from the more passive and bigger stack M. Dostergaard. So that's how I like playing that hand, looking back at it, is making the smaller raise and be selective about calling the resteal. Okay, we continue on down the list, and likes this. Okay, with the pocket deuces, that's definitely a good one. Let's look at the two 9-5 hands. So we had two consecutive hands where a 9-5 that were kind of interesting. So in this first one, we have Dostergaard calling, and the question is, should I shove? So based on the initial assumptions, Wizard's saying I should effectively shove any two cards, besides the bottom 1.8%, which I guess is like deuce 3 and deuce 4 offsuit. He's limping with 65. Well, I don't know. Is he really limping with 10-3 suited? I think he's probably limping a little narrower than that. But he's kind of loose. He was maybe 35 at that point, but this is heads up. Let's put him at 41. So, again, this involves some kind of guesswork. Didn't register. And some guys, I think, are a little afraid to go ahead and plug in numbers. But the bottom line is that there's no way to know exactly what these guys are doing, and you pretty much just have to start somewhere and give it a good guess, something reasonable, and based on that, move on. So for some reason, I'm having some trouble inputting these, but I think that this probably is a shove because we haven't had a situation yet where he's limped and I've shoved on him. So if you've already trapped a guy like that, then shoved on a guy really aggressively, sometimes you'll be trapped. I think as is, unless he's we make these pretty extreme, this is going to be a pretty good shove. So you won't win a ton of chips, but I do prefer the shove there, and I think that was more an at the moment thing where I decided to check. But shoving is generally the better play there. Okay, so in this one, it's saying he's going to call with about the top 35%, in which case I can get away with shoving any two. And the top 35, I actually think that looks pretty reasonable. So he's kind of loose, but at the same time, I don't know if he's going to be calling with hands like King 4 or Jack 8. He may with Jack 10, but I think that's pretty reasonable. So in this case, I'm getting a slight profit by shoving, and so I don't think that's a bad play. Okay, I'm going to let that be that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this look at how to play every hand. And this is Collin Moshman. Hope you guys had a good one. Signing off.